Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mark Bundang, and this is the Making Your Mark podcast. Today we have a very special guest. Her name is Olivia Dufour. I know Olivia from, well, let's just say actually, I discovered Olivia through a mutual platform called Medium. It's where we both write or have written. And as you know, if you've been a fan of mine or Olivia's work, you'll see that we have a lot in common, a lot of values in common, and we both love to share knowledge. But one thing that I really love that really attracted me to call on Olivia to do me a favor and get on my podcast is she's bold. She's someone who, if I could describe, is someone who I am not readily uh, like she's straight out of the bat bold and but human. So how do you mix those two? That's why I'm talking to Olivia today. So Olivia, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's a privilege.
So Olivia, this is called Making Your Mark, and I bring guests on for the very purpose that they've made their mark in society or in the community or in their profession or industry. Where have you made your mark?
Yes, well, it's a great question. I would say my career cannot really be defined by an industry. It was more of a mission that called me to work with people and lead people. Empathy is everything. It's the most important factor in my leadership. But about 10 years ago, I kind of broke into the world of diplomacy and law. And then I did what a lot of career counselors would advise a person not to do, which is I worked in 6 different industries over the last decade. And for me, there were 3 soft skills that were the most important and have guided me to where I am today. Negotiation, diplomacy, and working really well with stakeholders and shareholders. So those have defined what I do, how I teach people. It has not followed a linear path for me.
And I think this is a recurring theme on the podcast with other people that I've interviewed. It's that the career is never a straight line. It's
Exactly.
always kind of zigzaggy, but it's always in the direction that in your mind you've kind of set forth for yourself. I wanted to ask you, maybe, and this might be related to one of the experiences you're going to share, but I spoke a little bit about how you were bold when it comes out, even in your writing, like on a static form like that, I can see it. Not everyone is bold right off the bat. Were you?
I would say that I have always been intentional. That has been something that has kind of woven its way through my life, kind of to childhood, because I think that was very formative, as it would be for anybody's journey. Categorized as shy in school as a child. It was a little bit of a misnomer. People didn't really know how to categorize me. So they told me I was shy. And I began to kind of question, am I shy to my core? Years ago, I heard a quote by singer Fiona Apple that really struck a chord with me. And she said, I'm not shy, I have tact. And I speak when I have something to say, and I don't speak when there isn't something to be shared. Person in the world of diplomacy, when you're negotiating a contract, I've worked in defense, I've worked in tech, I've been employee number 1 and employee number 2 at early stage startups. My not speaking was working to my advantage. So for me, I've always been bold. I just didn't know how to really own it until I left college at age 20. Graduated, I didn't necessarily know where to start because people said, go into government, become an elected official. But that wasn't necessarily what I wanted for myself. And so I just started practicing boldness as not a choice, but as a lifestyle. And I just infused every aspect of my life of being bold. And I told myself every time I make a quote unquote choice, it's not a choice, it's an executive decision. And so I've been telling people every single day, I'm making 5 or 6 executive decisions. Eventually, I'm going to embody the energy and the aura of an executive. And that's what I've done.
So I wanted to ask you, maybe we can get into a little bit of one of the first things you want to share in terms of experience.
Absolutely. So for me, lesson 1 It dawned on me right after graduating college. Like I said, I was 20 years old, trying to figure out what industry or job to break into, didn't have a lot of direction or anyone guiding me. So I decided that executive presence was going to be the way that I presented myself to the world. So there's like a one-liner that every team that I've ever led hears from me. It's always executive presence is not only for executives. And the moment that you step into that space where what you say, the way that you present yourself, the way that you speak and communicate verbally, on paper, it all reflects this like contiguous representation of yourself as an executive. And I teach this to students when they're 15 years old. And I think that's the thing. You have to start really early with building that muscle of, if I start to show up in a room where maybe I'm not supposed to be, or I'm not expected to be, maybe I'm not even invited to be in that room, but I'm there, I'm going to show up with the energy that I'm supposed to be there because I can contribute a powerful insight. I started doing this at 20. It brought me in a lot of different directions in front of very powerful decision makers. And I wanted to share with everyone some of the more ironic or unexpected places that it brought me. Typically, someone is told that executive presence is for someone in the C-suite. You're supposed to build the skill over 30 to 50 years and arrive at an energy or a presence that allows you to be in boardrooms, talk to important clients and stakeholders, etc. And I just reverse engineered it because that's what worked for me. The young woman in a lot of spaces where I was the only woman, I said, this is going to be my formula for success. I would be at the UN, volunteering, getting myself into negotiation talks, explaining like either a tact or something tactical or a strategy that was important. Wouldn't even necessarily raise my hand because I knew that the group needed to hear it and that when they heard it, they would realize why I shared. I never really asked anyone to be in any of these meetings. The muscle that I was developing was I wasn't going to have to ask for a seat at the table. I didn't want to necessarily have to pull up a chair to that table and disrupt the meeting, etc. I wanted to get to a place where the seat at that table was reserved in advance for me, that I had a place to share those insights, and that those insights were going to move the law firm, the company, the startup in the right direction. Very early on, I started sharing these insights with diplomats, ambassadors, elected officials. And I didn't frame it where I found some information online and let me hand this insight off to you to go run with it. I wanted to be the person to share that insight with the context that I did the work to find. And that's also how I protected my insights. They were mine, and I wanted to share them. So instead of asking, I was 21, 22 or more, I would just walk up to like an equity stakeholder at a law firm or a CEO at a company. And I would say, I know that you're working on X project. I wanted to let you know that I did some of the work and I dug and I found this needle in the haystack. I want you to be able to share this at X meeting. But because of the work that I did, I think it's best for me to deliver that information so that there's no missing information or gaps. And that's what I did for the last 10 years. And I've never had to ask for an invitation.
My God, you found that out very quickly.
City, right?
Well, that's funny because by necessity, but you made the necessity
Yeah.
for yourself.
I created the demand.
You know, you did. I think one of the things that I've learned about working with executives is, and I'm going to go with the very stereotypical because we still live in a time when it's still very male dominated and still white hair, Caucasian male, like I still see it. But one thing I discovered was that they have as much insecurity about themselves and about how the decisions they make, if it's right or if it's wrong. They still have kids or they still have a house or they still have things in their lives that they worry about that isn't necessarily on task. And if you look at them that way, it makes it a lot easier to do what you did. from a mindset point of view, not the execution. You still have to do whatever you did, which I think is very masterfully created, especially at such an age
Thank
that you
you.
did it.
It's interesting. I
Yeah,
just wanted to follow up on what you said, if it's okay, um,
go ahead.
about representation in leadership. Um, so I have always been acutely aware of who is in leadership, how can we increase diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And at the day, it's my job to kind of lift as I climb. Who can I bring into the room so that we can amplify who's being represented? Something very interesting, which is that there are deep-seated worries, responsibilities that all people have, right? And if we're to ask someone in leadership, like, what keeps you up at night? We would have a lot of common things, whether it's finances
Mm,
or, you know. So I just wanted to quickly add on that during the pandemic, I didn't advertise this on LinkedIn or in my circles, but I had shared with a few executives who I believe at the time were probably 55 and up. And I just said, I'm going to offer a pro bono service. Come if you'd like, don't if you don't have the time. But I want to offer a drop in service, kind of like office hours, where if you have a last minute meeting, it's the 11th hour before an earnings call or a board meeting or even a presentation within your company. Because I was working on other projects and sometimes I was consulting throughout the pandemic, I said, you can call on me and I can help to work through whatever that stress was that you were dealing with. To my surprise, April took me up on that offer and I learned
mm,
more from that offer, which at the time I called the Leader's Lifeline, than anything else essentially that I've done offer wise since. A lot of the people said to me right before they were walking into an important call of know how to respond to the change that I was given at the last minute. What do I do? We all have those moments of panic. None of us are immune to it. How can we broaden and how can we flatten, make sure that we all realize that we're all dealing with similar things at a baseline? Nerves, anxiety, report back on results that are not necessarily favorable to a company or to
mm.
stakeholders and shareholders. That's hard, right? We had a hard quarter. How am I going to share that information? So that's really what I was trying to do. And I got so much insight because I realized that we're not talking about this. We are not talking about the pressures that executives are feeling because we're assuming that everything is perfect.
Mm. There'll be a variety of people who are gonna
Sure.
gonna watch this, right? Not just in the business world. When you say executive presence, is what is that? And then is that something that's relatable outside of, say, the business context?
100% question, because you can integrate all the different elements and principles of executive presence in your personal life. Excellent way for you to strengthen that muscle. Start speaking and showing up into rooms, whether they're doctor's offices and advocating for yourself and negotiating medical bills, or you speaking to different vendors to get essentially what you want through a negotiation. For me, I'm always trying to test things outside of a work context just as much as I am in it. So when I say executive presence, and many people will see it differently, for me, it's how I perceive the world, right? How am I
Mm,
thinking about the room that I'm about to walk into? Then how do I want to be received by that audience? How am I showing up in terms of my attitude? Am I speaking in a certain way that resonates with the audience? Am I being clear and concise in my communication? And am I dressing and holding myself accountable to being appropriate and professionalized in the environment? For me, executive presence was not, I'm going to show up like everyone else, dress like everyone else. I wanted to have my own style. I wanted
mhm,
to hold myself accountable. Like, if I want a certain job, then I'm going to dress for the job that I want. If I want to take it a step further, then dress for the person that's holding that company accountable, like a stakeholder or a shareholder externally. So I always showed up like the board member, and then I became the board member, and I've advised numerous nonprofit boards at this point. So embodying that energy of all the different elements. How am I speaking? How am I writing? Is my writing a reflection of how professional I view myself or the company? Because it's an extension of that company. And how am I moving throughout the business world? Are people actually thinking of me in a certain way? Like, is my name synonymous with discretion, integrity, empathy? And so once I put those all together, I kind of created my own system for executive presence.
There's so much in there. Because one of the things that I wanted to understand is how much time do you put into this? It's almost like you're in the shower, you're thinking about it.
It's funny that you say that because I've referred to this as like a lifestyle, right? It's infused into everything that I do. It becomes mindless once you've done it for a while, where the way that I'm speaking, if someone gives me a cold call and I want to respond to it in a way that is an extension of that executive presence, I'm going to speak in that language now as my voice. So I don't need to turn it off and turn it on anymore. And that has what has opened the doors and opportunities that I haven't needed to ask for. But also, if I did want to think about it on a day-to-day basis, if I'm building a personal brand, and let's say I'm spending 2 to 3 hours after work building that, those 2 to 3 hours over time are going to reap the rewards 10 times if I didn't do that. So for me, it's always about the return on that investment that I'm giving myself. I love a term, return on trust. I'm trusting myself with the way that I'm being perceived and received by the world. The return is going to come back to me.
And you must have developed some sort of feedback, right? Because you're constantly experimenting. So you must, like, what are some of the ways that you get feedback for the experiments that you run?
I'm pretty direct in how I ask. Like, I will ask people, is the way that I'm showing up for you effective? Every single day, I do that for the teams that I manage globally, the nonprofits that I manage after work, and then some of the coaching relationships that I maintain on a monthly basis. I'm not afraid of feedback because to me, it's going to make me better. And I believe that there is a such thing as constructive feedback, criticism, and over time, it's going to make me a better person. So, what I've really found is that if I ask directly, is this effective for you? Or what could I be doing differently? What's one thing I can do better for you this week? I'm removing and detaching it from myself. This is not a criticism of me, but there's one thing that I need to focus on this week to deliver for you. And so that helps me to realize that I'm going to continuously improve, and that's, I hope, what I'm going to achieve. But if I'm stagnant, I'm not helping anybody, including myself.
With young people, they tend to be, some are really like they'll take it, they'll take the criticism as long as it's done with kindness, right? And the proper intention. And you have to build that trust, by the way. There's a second variety of young people that I'm seeing today, and they're very much afraid to ask for feedback. There's one person that I've seen who hasn't, in the years in our office, never come to me. And it's not that I haven't left the door open, and it isn't because I don't have the reputation of having the door open. It's because there's something inside. What's the advice you would give to somebody who's afraid?
It's interesting that you say that because I think that all different age groups have that potential for fear. I think there are a lot of misunderstandings about certain generations that we could probably unpack all day long. And I've been very fortunate to extend services to people that are 15 to 30 and then kind of coach people different at different stages of their career based on what am I seeing within the generation? How can I, to your point, better approach you, make myself accessible to you? So for Gen Z and millennials, that would be the group that I'm coaching the most now. And for several people that I've spoken to recently, they don't necessarily know, and it hasn't been expressed to them from the company, what their role and responsibility is. So they're not clear, right? Which is not their fault. But there isn't this explanation of to come to me, even if it's outside of that domain, right? Hear from you in this open door policy session. And I want you to feel to take action. I think the inspiration is really where it comes in and resonates with Gen Z and millennials. And to know that we're going to follow through with it. The execution is critical. So if we're going to, encourage someone to be inspired to action, we're actually going to deliver on our promises. And a lot of times that lack of delivery is what causes that anxiety of this idea, or should I share this, someone, because they don't necessarily know if it's going to be valuable by a company. You might value it as an individual manager or contributor, but what is the greater culture of the company? And so when people come to me, I have executives sometimes that say, tell me a little bit more about Gen Z and how they're operating in the workplace. And one of the things that I've started to say, and I've corrected myself as a millennial, is I usually say, Gen Z does not need to be empowered. They need access. And a lot of people think that Gen Z needs to be empowered to do a certain action or to take initiative. Gen Z has some of the best ideas in tech, in startups that we have right now. Devices in the life sciences space. I am blown away by what I'm seeing from Gen Z. It's about a trust, and will you deliver? If I give you this proprietary information or I workshop this idea, where is this actually going to take me? And is it worth me risking my IP or something like that to take it to the next level? I think it's that level of, can you show up for me 100%? And so this generation of social entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, they are on a completely different level. The expectations and the bar is rising because they're saying, show me what you're able to do for me.
Access. You said the word access. What does that mean?
It can mean a lot of different things. Access to funding, access to alliances, coalitions. Who are you putting this person in front of? And I'll talk about alliance building later because it's very different from networking. But who are you intentionally sponsoring that idea of theirs to? Are you mentioning their name in important meetings? Are you creating pathways for that person's idea to take flight? And a lot of people, they will create the space and the time for that idea, but they're not necessarily greenlighting it and giving them the access to what they need. When I work with young entrepreneurs and I give them the space to talk, I never end the conversation there. I always say, I know a funder who I can introduce you to. And then I create a conversation with that funder and I repitch the idea from my perspective. What's the value to me? So always trying to think creatively of, this person has a great idea, but where can I help them take it? Because they already knew and were empowered enough to create this. What is my job? And I love, as I mentioned before, this quote by the author Viv Groskop. Am I lifting while I climb? Am I bringing this person one step closer to their dream?
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's quite helpful. You know what? We were talking about alliance building, and which is different from networking. Maybe as a segue to that, you can tell me what the difference is.
Absolutely. And it might mean something different, all different people. Alliances have been very helpful to me. And I learned about the difference between, networking by going to a one-off event and kind of pitching myself to pitching ideas that multiple people can benefit from and creating a coalition around that idea and building confidence around that solution or idea. And the results are tremendous. So when I was younger, I used to attend a lot of networking events where I would bring business cards or a resume, and I would pitch myself essentially as a solution to a problem. And there are limits to that because you either will have a buyer in the room or you won't. But when I started doing my research before certain events and I started bringing people from different sides of the aisle, from different groups together, maybe one part of a company is trying to build a solution, but I have a contact somewhere else. What I started to do was build coalitions around that problem. And I also identified the passion point, not just the pain point. I see that you're passionate about this issue. So is this person. Let's put you into the room together and let's have a multiplier effect. And that has been what has guided me to a lot of interesting opportunities. I love building coalitions. If you can build a coalition, which I'm sure a lot of people out there can, what you're going to do is your circle is going to broaden, but also you're going to realize that a lot of the problems that we have, they're bigger than ourselves, and they're companies, startups, corporations, organizations that are looking actively to fund and solve it as well. So you just have to pitch it as a general problem. It's not that it's, let me pitch myself and you either take it or you don't. This is a problem that is going to face us now or in 10 years, whether we address it or not. Why don't we address it as a group and, multiply the ability for us to actually solve it together? You get it as a win. I get it as a win. We don't need to be competitive about it, but let's make this a bigger, initiative. And that has been very helpful.
Interesting. So I guess what makes a coalition distinct from, say, a network is the focus on a problem. And I think that's very powerful because you said something that really has resonated with me. It's multiplier effect, that kind of thing, and it's something that I've tried to introduce to some of the people that I've been working with at my work, because it's not just at the leadership level. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of alliance building, is there a particular example you have of how you learned that? How you learned it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of broke into the world of diplomacy by volunteering and putting myself out there um, on the floor of the UN headquarters in New York. I was 20, 21 years old, and I did not know very much about the process of negotiation on the ground. Negotiation is you do need to bring people with different mindsets, belief systems together, and you have to find a common solution or paint that common pain point. For me, happen and unfold in real time was really powerful because I started to watch the body language of the people in front of me and realize that this person is suffering because of X, or they're uncomfortable with this part of the conversation because it impacts them or their, frequency in this way. So what I started to do was I started to think of how can I position and frame this in a way that it broadens who it will impact and how we can solve it. Maybe it's changing the language a little bit, digestible. Maybe it's us being bold enough to go over and ask the person directly, what about this is making you uncomfortable? So I just started asking questions like that and learned for elected officials in the past. I was learning how to bring people to the table. They didn't necessarily want to be there or feel that they needed to be there. While at the UN, I used to be brought into conversations where they would say, I don't know why, X constituency is here at the table, but there they were. And about unifying people behind a mission and realizing that the person sitting next to you, you might have preconceived notions about, but they might have access to something that's going to move the boat faster. So for me, it was, I am going to go in with a mindset of divisiveness. I'm going to find ways to work with this person. And it's been very helpful because I do that in nonprofits every single day. Let's, multiply our impact by bringing 3 nonprofits and sister organizations together than just doing it as one, because I don't feel like anyone needs, the saying I did it first. No, we did it together. And I think that's the benefit of building an alliance.
It's interesting. That's very interesting because it's super important for some people to be the one, the only one, or the first mover advantage, especially if you're traditionally competitors in a certain market. How do you overcome that that want in order to form that coalition or alliance?
I think what you can do is you can frame the problem in a way that's still beneficial to them. It's still going to give them the gravitas, the exposure that they're looking for. You would just need to do the research in advance of meeting with that person to be able to call out what benefit they're going to get. And I always do that. I personalize it based on what they're going to get out of it. Once I know that, it feels A, more personalized, and B, they're going to be able to share that insight and multiply how many eyes there are on this once we deliver. So for me, it's always about here's what's in it for you and your audience, but we don't need to be adversaries or competitive. Early in my career, I was actually counted out of the majority of jobs. I was probably rejected by 300 to 400 jobs in my early 20s because every single job asked me the same question. Are you competitive? And I said no. And I was honest. I would not categorize myself as competitive, not traditionally or in another way. So for me, what I started doing as a hiring manager was I just stopped asking if a person's competitive because it didn't matter to me. I started asking, what are you passionate about? And they started telling me what they're passionate about. And I realized that that's what's going to move them forward. But that person might not see themselves as competitive. And maybe I don't want someone who sees themselves pitted against someone else. There are many ways to be competitive and to arrive at your goal. But I just didn't want to frame myself or count someone out because they didn't see themselves that way.
Interesting, because I guess competitive implies a zero-sum game where someone wins and someone loses, and I
Absolutely.
think that's what you wanted to avoid. It's interesting. Do you look at it that way? Like there's a win for everybody when you form an alliance, and everyone wins, but some win more than others. Is that a factor in forming an alliance?
I think that there are ways in which, if you're looking for like social currency or if you're looking for financial gains, there's always going to be something that is going to be more beneficial for someone based on whatever their, initial goal was. But if you construct your coalition in a way that everybody wins either partially or they achieve a certain goal of theirs internally by participating in that coalition, I think the mindset shifts. That person isn't thinking of it as like, I'm winning more than coalition member B, because they're actually able to take the win from that coalition back to their company or back to their team and amplify it themselves. The momentum doesn't stop once you reach a win. You have to keep it going. And so if a person doesn't want to keep the momentum, they're not going to, right? It's going to die in the water. So I always tell people, once you have left this conversation or this meeting, keep one action going on in the background that keeps this alive. Because you can't fall back on and you can't blame a lack of funding or a lack of success for actions that you're not taking.
You know what? I think there's one more in there that we can kind of go through in this episode. Do you have another experience that you want to share with the audience at this
Sure,
time?
absolutely. And I'll keep it brief, but it's a powerful one. Um, if you look at my career, I've always put myself intentionally in kind of the epicenter of chaos. For some people, they purposely stay away from chaos or crisis because they're right, it's messy. There is a lot of gray area. It's not for everyone. And I'm not advocating for people to stay in a space that creates anxiety or not sure of their surroundings. But what I would advocate for people to do is to put themselves in an uncomfortable situation at least once in their career. Make a conscious decision that you're going to be uncomfortable for some time, but you're going to come out of it and you will have learned a lot. It's like free school, right? You're going to learn more, and what you're going to learn is going to have an amplifying effect to your team as well, or your family at home. So I have always wanted to be kind of at high velocity, high discretion companies. I want to be given something that maybe someone else isn't going to be given. And I'm going to handle it with the utmost of professionalism and discretion. But for a lot of people, that's a big task to bear. And there's a lot of risk. So really what I'm advocating for here is choose whatever level of being uncomfortable. You don't have to bite off something that's too large. You don't have to find yourself in an environment where you just can't take it. But I always ask people before I give them an opportunity, with a team or with a nonprofit, I always ask them, what level of change or velocity are you comfortable with? And they'll tell me. whether it's a task or a type of project. Maybe it's a type of client or a tier of client they're not used to speaking with. And I encourage them to tell me what's behind that. What emotion goes through your mind when you're put into that environment? And for my own team, the question that I have, and I have, nonprofits that I'm managing where people are all over the world, I always say, can you communicate to me when you're having a problem if you're experiencing a one-off concern? Is it a wider change that is making you feel uncertain? Is it a crisis? Maybe that's being caused by a wider cultural problem. Or is it chaos, something that you can't rein in immediately? And once we've identified, one of those four C's, then we're able to come out of it with a strategy or a plan of attack. So for me, I'm always asking people, it might feel right now like you are going through chaos. Are you truly experiencing chaos, or are you conflating a one-off concern with chaos or crisis? Are you experiencing change, but it feels like crisis to you right now in this moment? That's very human. I experience it too. But I just encourage everyone to get out in front of that discomfort, try something different. You might fail. And if you fail, you will know how to stand up better next time. But if you wait until later on in your career, you're going to feel that discomfort even more.
That's important. I wish someone was my mentor when I was 20 and they told me this. I had to learn this almost being thrown in the deep end later on. What was your first experience diving into chaos?
There were several. I was always choosing to be like the first responder in my career. I wanted to be that first person that gets news across my desk. Um, I would say one of the first experiences, I was working at a news desk in New York as a volunteer. I was out of college. I wasn't able to be quote unquote an intern yet. There were too many internships that were being taken, and I understood. So I said, I'll volunteer my time. The news would come in. It would always be of crisis around the world. And I had to basically digest and deliver that crisis on a daily basis. So what I started to do was I would break down for myself those four C's. Is this a one-off ad hoc event around the world that's happening? Is it a deeper societal or concern that is amounting to crisis? Then when I transitioned into working in big law, I would receive pallets of caseloads, and it would be my job to go through them first. And to someone receiving pallets of files, that would feel like crisis. The volume is too big for any one person to handle. So I said, you know what? I'm going to set a timer, and I'm going to give myself 5 hours to work through this. And if I can work through this in 5 hours, this is not a crisis. This is not chaos. I can create a system that controls this crisis that I'm feeling. And once I started doing that and I had a system around it, I realized this is not a crisis. These are tasks, right? That I can break down into smaller pieces. And I would do the same thing if like a tier 1 client would reach out to me early in my 20s and they felt like they were going through a crisis in-house. I would find a way to speak to them to break down that crisis. And I would let them know, I hear your concern. I see you. And we're going to work through this together. There's no need to blame anyone. Your perception of what's going on is valid. Our perception is equally valid. And so once there was a little bit of context around that, 4 a.m. email that we get in the world of consulting, it felt a little bit less severe because we're both human at the end of the day, and maybe we can create a little bit less lack of context.
Very nice of you to share, Olivia.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Is there, as tradition on this podcast, is there any overarching wisdom that you'd like to part this episode with?
Yeah, I would kind of harken back to what I said about lifting as you climb. That has touched every aspect of what I've done thus far. And in many ways, I feel like I'm just getting started, which is exciting. A way each week to lift someone towards opportunity. And don't make it a me versus you. What can I do wholeheartedly that will give someone an opportunity? I mean, also volunteers and interns. I think that a lot of people are doing the work for companies and they don't necessarily feel like they're being as lifted, um, you know, vertically. And I think it's really important for everyone in a business to feel like there is a champion out there for them. I've been championed by a lot of different people at different rungs in a corporate ladder. And maybe someone listening right now can be that champion for that person. Um, and so that's what I would leave you with.
I think you had me at champion. That's a magic word for me.
Amazing.
I wish everyone would find their champion sooner rather than later.
Yes.
Olivia, thank you so much for taking the time to share just a bit of the wisdom and the knowledge that you have, the experiences. I can tell that everyone you touch is very lucky
Thank you so much.
to, yeah. So with that being said, we'll have this on YouTube in no time, and I hope that everyone likes, shares, subscribes, and looks out for more episodes with or without Olivia, but definitely one more at least.
Absolutely. You
So
can count on me, Mark.
thank you very much, Olivia. Everyone, I wish you the best. Until the next time, take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thank you very much. If you made it this far to the end of the podcast, I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You know, we're just starting out, so it would help if I could just ask one more thing of you. Please subscribe to this channel and share the podcast, share the episode on any platform you can. It would mean a lot to me and it would help us a lot. Thank you.